So my students tell me that daily video releases are quite boring, so we're changing our style up here a little bit and we're reviewing all the literature on food research for a month. Get ready, we have a lot to talk about. So our first study comes from Pakistan. It looks at orphanages and nutrition in those. And what we have is 255 kids out of 7 different orphanages out of 14 in Pakistan. And what they find is that 1/3 of these kids are malnourished. And of that, 2/3 are actually orphans and 1/3 are destitute. What does that tell us? What it tells us is often when you have these places where there's unwanted people from society, they had to be kept alive somehow. The easiest way to get them food in their stomach is something that's high carbohydrate, ultra processed, along those lines. And that's the easiest way to feed a person. You can mass produce grains and just get them food. But high grain, high carb food may not be the most nutritious. Now the sum of this study and outcome was that because there is no meat and dairy, it's a problem. But I would say it's more of micronutrients from whole food, plant-based sorts of sources rather than what they've mentioned. Again, the question becomes, what's the value of all this? And it's hard to say, there's so many things that get into this, but where there's people in a situation and they need food and it's being funded by the government or other NGOs, you have to consider what all the priorities are, and food may not be the most compared to infrastructure. The next is an awareness of millet use in Kerala by Ayurvedic practitioners. Now, what does all that summarize? It's basically they look at 300 some Ayurveda practitioners and see if they know the value of millet in diet. Ayurvedic people and practitioners call themselves doctors. They're not modern medicine, but they use that title. So what's so big about them knowing the value of millet? Well, if you look at India pre-colonialism, millet was the main source of food, and it's a very healthy source of food. It's better than rice. But if the healthcare practitioners that are guiding patients don't have an awareness of this, then how does the patient get to that? Either they get it from influencers, non-medical people, etc. So it's good that these Ayurvedic practitioners know the value of millet, and hopefully they'll influence patients accordingly. The next thing we're looking at is kind of an interesting study that's called the rice diet. Now this kind of confounds me, but the rice diet was something that was in place until 1958. 1958 being the year that we got thiazide diuretics to control hypertension. So until then we knew there was hypertension, we knew there was diabetes, but we didn't really know how to control them that well. And from there, they made this thing called the rice diet. 2 cups of rice with some fruits and vegetables every day. But it's a low sodium diet. So what's the value of all this? It still confounds me how a white rice, high carbohydrate diet really brings blood pressure and diabetes down, but that's what they've said. And what they've done different in this study is they found 17,000 people from handwritten papers that they used an AI on to interpret their outcomes. And what they show is that, yeah, if you do this rice diet, you're going to get better. But I don't think it's the rice. I think it's actually just the adding in whole food, plant-based sources and restriction of meat. They do get meat products, but they get it twice a week. And the rest of the time it's going to be a carbohydrate, which people need, even though it's a refined one, but there's going to be a lot of vegetables in there. The next is barriers to timed restriction eating in Tamil Nadu. And this is done in 432 people, and essentially what they're looking at is, why don't people do these healthy practices? So they found a lot of different problems, including just having the way the day goes. The way the day goes, people don't get a chance to eat properly. Another thing they found is that work conflicts get in the way. So work hours will conflict with the way a person can eat food. The other thing that came into play was the family meal. So that's the one time everyone sits together, and if one person is not eating, it kind of breaks the whole family meal thing. Now, this is important, and these are the barriers people actually face when they try to do stuff. And as practitioners, if we're not aware of this, we can guide them, but it'd be useless. So understanding individual variation becomes very important in making a proper prescription. The next study is looking at Crohn's and the microbiome. And what they have is 51 kids who have Crohn's, 50 who are healthy. All these kids have a trash diet of ultra-processed foods. And they look to see what does the microbiome look like in these kids. Now they find that even though both have a trash diet, the ones with Crohn's are already pro-inflammatory, and they find that they have a higher E. coli count. What does all that really mean for us? What it means is if you have a higher E. coli count, you have much less diversity in your gut microbiome, and that can lead to more inflammation. You need all sorts of bacteria in that gut microbiome, but if you have too much of one kind, you don't have something of another kind, and that leads to problems. So from there, we're looking at plant-based diets, and are they really good? And yeah, the study that we have here shows, again, it is. But then the question is, why is a plant-based diet so great for obesity? And the answer is, plant sources don't contain a cholesterol. Animal products will have a cholesterol, be it a milk or an egg or a meat. They come with cholesterol. The plant stuff doesn't have that much of it, if at all. So you can literally eat as much as you like and not have to worry too much. But this really comes down to a simple thing. Are people eating food or are they eating food products? The way we live nowadays, we have such fast lives, we don't get time to sit down and make a healthy meal. We just eat whatever's available, and if it's junk, it's junk. You can control what goes into food, because it's food. You just prepare and you eat it, right? A food product is ready for you to eat. It's competing with some other food product on the same shelf. Which one looks older and which one's actually older, you don't actually know. Which one has preservatives that allow it to stay on the shelf longer than something else, again, you don't really know. But what you do know is that if it's been sitting there longer than 24 hours, it's a bit of a problem. And along those lines, we're looking at additives in food. So, when you get additives in food, they can produce dysbiosis. Now, they have a study here of 20 people, and they do the gut microbiome analysis with 16S RNA. And they look at all the common additives, and the common additives really affect the gut microbiome. A high carbohydrate diet allows for bacteria that process carbohydrate better. A high fat diet allows for more bacteria that process fat better. That's natural. But then these bacteria on their own, if they're too much, will produce other products that can actually create problems later. And then when you start bringing in polymaltodextrose and other kinds of additives, including coloring agents, preservatives, they allow particular bacteria to thrive versus others. The more and more this is consumed, the more problems it makes. Along the way, we look at how a diet impacts Parkinson's disease. There's another study, and it individually assesses different diet types. The bottom line on this study is that a whole food plant-based diet is perfect and everything else is not that great. But when you look at it, what it's coming down to is, again, foods that promote a non-diverse microbiome will then lead to over-representation of particular bacteria, and those can make problems. And when it's a meat-based diet, like a carnivore diet, it actually leads to a lot of other problems that can accelerate Parkinson's disease. So diet control is really big in these kind of conditions. To counter that, of course, we have a different study that says restrictive diets, do they equal depression or not? Now, they could not really prove that a restrictive diet produces depression or controls depression, but their bottom line was to say, if you have a diverse diet that is otherwise nutritionally balanced, you don't have to restrict your diet. And I see some sense in that. Not everyone can do this ethical, vegan, whole food, plant-based thing. It's just not the way they're raised, the way their culture is, their society is. But we can definitely control how much we take in. The last study is a bit interesting, and it's looking at the second to last study is a study of 3-year-old children in Japan, and it looks at their dental health. So the bottom line in this study is that dairy is good for 3-year-old children. Now, children up until the age of 2 will benefit from their mother's milk. If we're supplementing milk in different forms from other sources like other animals, it's not exactly a natural thing. Of course, it's socially acceptable, everyone is having cheese and milk and all sorts of stuff, but it's some other mammal's product designed for that mammal's child, not for humans. So the bottom line from this study is that dairy is good, but what did they compare to? They compared regular dairy product to custard and other sorts of unhealthy sugar-added substances that have a dairy base. So they found that those who have this sugar-added substance will have more caries versus those that have just plain milk. Have they really proven themselves? I don't think so. But it's just a way to say dairy is good, fine. Our last study looks at a midnight snack or a bedtime snack in gestational diabetes. So women are becoming overweight more and more nowadays with all the ultra-processed food they can get their hands on, and leads to gestational diabetes. And sometimes people are told to get a bedtime snack. Now, what they do is they have a control group and an intervention group. The intervention group gets a midnight or bedtime snack. The control group doesn't. And the one group that does not get that midnight snack or evening snack, they actually do better than the kind that's getting the snack. Meaning a time restriction of food intake won't load the glucose in the body. It won't make an insulin spike. So that is this month in nutrition.